All right, everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to go over exercises 7 and 8, climbing and descending, of your flight training syllabus. So what this PowerPoint all includes is the different types of climbs, the proper climbing procedure, along with the different types of descents, the descending procedure. Your reference will be climbing and descending out of the flight training manual. So the goal of this lesson is really just teach you how to climb the airplane and how to descend, how to do it safely. That's where the procedure comes in. As part of that is going to be leveling off at these specific altitudes. The purpose of it is, once again, climbing and descending is a basic flight maneuver. We're still learning the basics of flight, how to complete each maneuver, and it's required for every single flight you do. You have to climb and descend no matter what. It's going to build on what you've learned in the past with attitudes and movements. All right, before we get started, we'll go over some background knowledge just to make sure we know everything up until this point. Starting with number 1 here. What movement produces a nose-up attitude and with what control surface? That is going to be the pitching movement, and the control surface is your elevator. The movement that produces a banked attitude is rolling, and the control surface is the aileron. What three causes of unwanted yaw? So far, we've only covered slipstream, and we're going to cover P factor today. There's 5 listed there. All right, so to get into today's lesson, the definition of climbing is just when the airplane's gaining altitude, we call that climbing. And when the airplane is losing altitude, we call that descending. Climbing and descending. So there's 4 different types of climbs that we can do. We have the best angle of climb, the best rate of climb, a normal climb, and a cruise or an en route climb, which is less common than the others. So starting with the best angle of climb, this is called VX. So VX, it gives you the greatest altitude gain and the shortest amount of horizontal distance. So on our diagram, it's shown by the purple line. These 2 aircraft, they've climbed to the same altitude, but the one on the left has done it in a much shorter distance over the ground. So that's what it's referring to. You cover a shorter distance over the ground to climb to that altitude. So this is really helpful if you're clearing over obstacles, like during takeoff or on a go-around, and you got to clear trees or power lines, maybe a big hill or a mountain. You could climb at the best angle. Now the airspeed to find that is going to be found in the POH. Most likely in the beginning of section 4, normal procedures, it'll list out your different airspeeds. If you're flying a 150, this could be 56 knots. If you're in a 172, it could be 62 knots. But you'll find that in the POH. Okay, now looking at the best rate of climb. This airspeed is known as VY, and this is the greatest altitude gain in the shortest amount of time. So if you want to climb up to altitude and spend the least amount of time doing it, you're going to climb at VY. So this is handy just to save time. Normally when we're climbing to altitude, we want to do it quickly. So we'll climb at VY initially after takeoff, just to get some space between us and the ground if there's no obstacles. Once again, it is found in the POH. You look under section 4 and it would be listed in there in the normal procedures. So the difference between the best rate angle of climb and the best rate, with our diagram here, the best rate of climb would have climbed to this altitude, we'll say 1,000 feet, a lot faster than the airplane on the left, climbing at best angle. But you can see it took a longer horizontal distance. He'd have less clearance over the trees compared to the guy climbing at best angle, where it took him longer, but he did it in a shorter horizontal distance over the ground. So that's the difference between your two climb, your VX and your VY. Just some numbers here for the best rate of climb in a 172. It could be 74 knots if you're flying an S model, and the 150 could be around the 68 knot mark. Okay, next we got a normal climb. So if you're up at altitude and you just want to climb, you don't really want to do a best angle, if you don't want to do a best rate. But if you're at 3,000 feet and you're climbing to 4,000 feet, that would be a good time to do a normal climb. The climb speed, as far as the airspeed, it's normally higher than your best rate and your best angle. So, for an example of a 172, somewhere between that 70 to 80 knot range. Once again, you'll find that in your POH. But the advantages to doing this normal climb is better forward visibility. So when you're in the best rate and the best angle, the nose will be up on the horizon, maybe a bit above in your best angle. So it's blocking your view in front of you. So the normal climb, a little bit lower nose attitude, gives better visibility for any airplanes in front of you. And it also gives better engine cooling as well. We have more air going through the engine cowling, keeps the engine nice and cool on a hot day. So those are the advantages to doing a normal climb over the other two. Now the last one, a cruise or en route climb, is just a very slow climb. You gain altitude very gradually. It's the most comfortable of the three. The other advantage, it maintains a really high ground speed. So if you're looking to get to your destination fast, you'll have a high ground speed and get there a little bit quicker. The disadvantage, it's going to take a really long time to climb up to altitude. So you would use this if you were just doing a short climb, maybe 500 feet. Because if you're climbing at 100 or 200 feet per minute, if you got to climb 1,000 feet, that's going to take 2 minutes every 1,000 feet. So keep that in mind. It's going to be slightly higher nose attitude with a higher power setting when you're comparing it to cruise. So you're just in a very gentle nose up attitude. All right, so there's our different types of climbs. Now the procedure to enter, each of them is the same. We use the acronym APT. So that stands for attitude, power, trim. So the attitude, you want to set the nose up for your desired airspeed. So you'll be familiar through experience of where your nose position should be relative to the horizon at full power to give you the exact airspeed you want. Focus on where that horizon is crossing your cowling. For the first bit, you'll just be guessing. But the attitude, you set it to where you think the desired airspeed would be. Then your power, you're going to go to climb power or full power once your airspeed is indicating your desired climb airspeed. So if you want to climb at 74 knots, you would lift the nose up to an attitude that is going to produce 74 knots. Once that's indicated on your airspeed indicator, you're going to apply full power. Next, you're going to trim to relieve any control pressure. So if you let go of the yoke, the attitude, the nose of the aircraft should not change. It should remain right where it is. During a climb, it's a very good airmanship to be lowering the nose every 500 feet to look for traffic if you're doing a really aggressive nose-up climb. So you maintain that throughout the climb, maintain your constant airspeed, and then you're going to want to recover coming up to your altitude. And we use the exact same acronym, APT. So attitude, we're going to lower the nose to cruise. Power, you'll reduce the power to a cruise power setting. You don't want to do this right away. You want to let the airplane accelerate and build airspeed. If you're in a 172, maybe somewhere around the 80 knot mark, you're going to reduce that power to a cruise power setting, and then it'll continue to accelerate up to maybe 190 knots. Last step is going to be trim. So once it always trim to relieve that control pressure. If you let go of the yoke, the attitude of the aircraft should not change. A good rule of thumb to begin your level out procedure is going to be about 10% of your VSI. So if you're climbing at 500 feet per minute, about 50 feet early is when you want to start that level out. So as you lower the nose, get your power back and trim, you're going to gain that 50 feet. So it's going to help avoid overshooting your altitude. All right, let's review climbing here. So if you'd like, you could pause the video, answer them, and then unpause, and I'll bring the answers up here. So 4 types of climbs and when we use them. The best angle of climb, Vx, is used for obstacle clearance. The best rate of climb, Vy, is used to climb away from the ground quickly or climb in the shortest amount of time. Your normal climb is used when the climb you want to do doesn't fit the criteria of best rate or best angle. And the cruise or Enroute climb is used to maintain a very high ground speed. It's definitely the least popular of the 3. Next, we have how do we enter a climb, attitude, power, trim. How do we recover from the climb, attitude, power, trim. So you want to get that APT memorized for climbing, as well as when to do each step. All right, next we can talk about descents. So if we have 2 types of descents, power off descent and power on descent. And we'll start with the power off descent, the simpler of the 2. So your power is reduced all the way to idle. It's going to be a very high rate of descent. So when you're in a descent, very important that you control your airspeed with the attitude of the airplane. Right, so if we lift the nose up, the airspeed is going to decrease. The airplane will slow down. If we lower the nose, the airspeed is going to increase as we speed up. Generally, in a power off descent, you're targeting an airspeed for the best glide. That'll be found in the POH. In your emergency procedures, you'll find the best glide airspeed. You may find yourself doing this following an engine failure, or really any time you want a very high rate of descent, you'll bring that power out to idle. One thing to be aware of is shock cooling the engine. So not only in cold weather conditions, but also in warm weather conditions, it's possible to shock cool the engine because we're not creating any power, very little at idle, therefore very little heat. So with that cool air at altitude going through, your engine's going to cool very rapidly. So good airmanship, you'll be doing engine warms every 500 feet, bringing the power into the green and then back to idle to avoid any shock cooling and good engine care. Next, we got the power on descent. And the only difference now, instead of the power at idle, it would be at a desired power setting. So your throttle is set to the setting and it allows very precise control of your descent. So on a power on descent, your attitude still controls the airspeed. So you're still pitching up and down to maintain your desired airspeed. And the power is going to control your rate of descent. So your vertical speed indicator, whether you want to descend at 500 feet per minute or 300 feet per minute or 700 feet per minute, the change is going to be done with your power. So it's very important to recognize that. Doing like an en route or a cruise descent is going to be maintaining your cruise airspeed. And you're just going to do a nice, comfortable, gentle descent. So a lot of times every time coming into an airport, you'll have your descent planned out. You'll start descending maybe 10 miles back and do a nice, gentle descent all the way into your your airport. The other time a power on descent is conducted is during the approach. You're doing a very precise descent down to landing. Now let's talk about our procedure. So we flip the attitude and power with a descent. So we use the acronym PAT, standing for power. Set your desired power setting. So I put here 100 RPM is going to equal 100 feet per minute. This will get you in the ballpark. You'll have to make small adjustments, but if you're coming in and you just want to, this only works if you maintain your current airspeed. So if you're maintaining your 90 knots and you want to descend at 500 feet per minute, you would reduce 500 RPM. So you want to think ahead of the airplane and get your power setting based on your rate of descent. You can, if you remember back to straight and level flight, where reducing 100 RPM is going to equal a 5 knot change in airspeed. Well, we can combine that. So if we want to, let's say if we're at cruise 90 knots, we want to descend at 80 knots and 500 feet per minute. Well, we need to reduce 500 RPM for your descent and another 200 RPM to lose that airspeed. So in this case, power, you're going to reduce it 700 RPM. Your attitude, set for desired airspeed. So if we're going 90, we want to descend at 80, you're going to hold it in cruise until your airspeed is at 80 knots, and then allow the nose to drop to maintain 80 knots. Next, trim. Always trimming to relieve control pressure. So power, attitude, trim, and the steps to follow for each one. While you're maintaining the descent, you'll make minor adjustments. If you want to descend faster, so if we want to descend at 700 RPM with our scenario, we're going to reduce an additional 200 RPM and then just pitch to maintain your airspeed. If we want to reduce the descent, you're going to increase the power and pitch to maintain airspeed. So that's how, during a power on descent, you'd be controlling that rate of descent using power all the way through your descent. All right, now we can talk about recovering out. So if we're coming up to our altitude, we're going to use the same acronym, power, attitude, trim. Nice and simple here. The power goes to cruise, your attitude goes to cruise, and then you trim to relieve the control pressure. And you can use your same rule of thumb as beginning that level off at 10% of your vertical speed indicator. So you're descending at 500 feet per minute. You'll get the power in to cruise approximately 50 feet early, and that's going to avoid missing your altitude. A couple different factors that affect our descents. Obviously power is going to be one, but we also have flaps. So we'll introduce some flaps in the descent and see what effect that has on the airplane. But what's going to happen is as you put down more flap, this is with a constant airspeed and a constant power setting. Our diagram, starting from the left with no flap, it's a nice flat descent angle. Now if we increase some of the flap, in order to maintain airspeed, you're going to have to lower the nose, and this is going to give you improved visibility and a little bit steeper of a descent angle. The more flap you put down, the more you got to lower the nose, and the more the steeper your descent angle becomes. When you lower the flaps, you're increasing the amount of lift being produced by the wing, but you're also increasing the amount of drag, which is a good thing in this case because as you lower the nose, it's preventing your airspeed from building up. Generally, if the flaps are up and we're lowering the nose, the airplane's going to start to go very fast. But if we're slowing down, we can lower flap and maintain our approach airspeed of say 65 knots with good forward visibility, keeping the nose pointed down at the runway. So that's the main time you're going to be using flap is approach to land. Here we have wind. Wind's really going to affect your descent in a power off approach along with a power on. But if we have, look in the diagram on the left, a tailwind, it's going to allow the airplane to glide down further compared to a headwind, where it's going to shorten that glide because you have to fight against the wind. Fairly straightforward. A method you could use in this scenario is to slightly increase your airspeed from best glide in order to get a little bit further. So the best glide airspeed is in a zero wind condition. All right, another factor we have to consider during a climb is propeller factor, or P factor. So here is a diagram of an airplane showing the lift produced by the propeller. Looking at the center diagram here, the downgoing blade, which would, from the pilot's seat, would be the right-hand blade, is going to have a higher angle of attack when compared to the left-going blade or the upgoing blade. So on the right, if we have a higher angle of attack, the downgoing blade is going to produce more lift. If it has more lift, it's going to pull harder on that propeller, and this is going to cause the airplane to yaw to the left. You'd have to correct it with right rudder in order to stay nice and straight. Now this diagram only happens when the aircraft is in a nose up attitude. So when you're in a nose up attitude at full power, you have P factor yawing the nose to the left. You have slipstream also yawing the nose to the left. So it requires a lot of right rudder, especially when you're climbing at the best angle or in a nose high attitude, in order to stay nice and coordinated. So that's the nose up factor. It's opposite in nose down. So when you're in the nose down, the upgoing blade, which is on the left, is producing more lift, wanting to yaw the nose to the right, and the left rudder would have to be applied. This is, in the nose down, you don't notice it near as much because you still have the slipstream wanting to yaw left, nose down P factor wanting to yaw right, so they kind of cancel each other out, opposed to a nose up attitude where, as shown in this diagram, P factor yawing left, slipstream yawing left, so lots of right rudder. If you do have a propeller at your flight school, you can get your flight instructor to show you the propeller and pitching up, and it's really easy to visualize that change of angle of attack if you have a propeller right in front of you. All right, so review questions of descent. What are our two types of descents and how do we use them? We got a power off descent used to achieve a very high rate of descent, and a power on used for precise control of the descent. That could be, approach to an airport or final approach to land. The procedure for entering a descent is power, attitude, trim, and the procedure to recover from a descent is also power, attitude, trim. Okay, a couple safety items for this is doing cockpit checks. So this could be if you're flying a carbureted airplane, you would need carb heat hot. If you're reducing that power out of the green arc, make sure you're doing good lookouts for other traffic, preventing every 500 feet during the climb, preventing shock cooling during power off descents by warming the engine every 500. Confirming the airspeed is safe prior to extending flaps. So you'll find your VFE, flap extension speed, in the limitations section of the POH. So you should be familiar with that airspeed. Make sure that you're not going to overspeed your flaps. Final review questions. How do we enter a climb? Well, attitude, power, trim. How do we enter a descent? Power, attitude, trim. What are the effect of flaps in a descent? Well, it's going to lower the stall speed. It's going to give us better, improved visibility, and it allows you to increase the rate of descent or lower the nose without increasing airspeed. Right, question 4. What controls airspeed in a climb or descent? And then what controls the rate of climb or descent? So the airspeed is going to be controlled by your pitch, and the rate of descent or climb will be with your power. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer those for you. The next lesson we're going to do is exercise 9, turns. So you can have a read through your flight training manual and be familiar with the next lesson.